Hello, hello. So finally, I'm ready to tackle this very frustrating passage of Alice A. Bailey. There's nothing that says that we must have a struggle or chaos, but I feel like along the way there were some people that decided that they could transfer their karma onto others by having them believe that we are meant to suffer. And this is not the knowledge of or awareness of a great being, but the expression through human instrumentality of the divine omniscience. So there are 7 streams of energy, and they are the building blocks of all that is. These 7 rays can be used to describe all that is in creation. And they originally come from one thing, which is source or the divine. Basically, like we're talking about the light refracting through the prism. I'll put that up here too, because that's what this is all about. The one light goes through the prism. Sevan calls it the prison. Interesting, with etymology, spiritual etymology his way. It goes through the prism, or the prison. Which is it? That's part of what I'm doing here. Like, is all of this stuff meaning to trap us in a way of thought that is harmful, destructive, or is it constructive? And I think there is a little bit of work that I had to do here to unpack what is constructive out of 2 specific parts of this and move it away from a way that is very literally destructive, because it is a potential misinterpretation or reckless spreading of these teachings, which could be misinterpreted or misused by people who, want to pervert these teachings. Anyways, back to the point. So the prism or prison reflects that singular one light, that unity, into the 7, the different colors, of the visible light spectrum. So that's what we see with the prism experiment. But then I found an interesting image that also shows that putting that light back into the one. So I think that's what we don't get as part of the overall picture of this. I think a big part of our work is not just this division into the 7 rays, which is reflected in whatever this experience is, allows us to see ourselves as all these separate things, these separate beings. But part of our work is recombination, and that's going to be this other image that, if I can find it, I'm going to put up here. So you see that the white light is dispersion through the glass prism, and it reflects as these different colors, these different rays, these different energies that we can say are separate traits and our separate qualities. But our work is to actually recombine into that unity consciousness once again. So it's not about this division and in picking one of these rays to be our, be the mascot of that one energy. We're supposed to embody all of this, right? And we're supposed to understand how these traits can be expressed in the highest way by also understanding the lower expression of these, because these can be kind of just shot out in a way that's like, are we sure that's good? Like, we'll talk about Ray 1 and Ray 4 in this process. So I will try to get this off and sent, because I've been so annoyed with this section. It's been such a headache for me, and so frustrating that even this I don't think is exactly how I wanted to discuss it, but I think it's done. I'm going to bring in the AI I brought in the AI, or I'm going to, I don't know which part of this video, how it will end up being in the end, but the AI to show these visual ideas of these 7 builders reflecting these different energies. And I'll read the little paragraphs that go along with them from the section of the book. But I really wanted to focus on Ray 1 and Ray 4 here, because this was where I felt the biggest kind of duty to disclose or clarify that this could be a trap that a lot of people have fallen into when they read this stuff. Just like anybody who gets enticed into the dark arts, there's like a fine line where it's like you learn all these divine traits and abilities, and with that responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility, like say, right? Like, you're going to be able to impact your environment and to cause change, or to create, or to influence, or do whatever it is that you gain through learning how to embody these traits. And there should be guardrails. Like, you should know, hey, when am I reaching into control, coercion, domination, destruction, all that stuff, because it can be tempting. And if you are tempted into that, you're not practicing divinity. You're practicing its opposite. Through the words of power, the worlds came into ordered being, and the Lord of the Ray of ceremonial magic brings about the organization of the divine organism. When the desire of all nations shall come, and the cosmic Christ shall stand revealed, all men and all creatures shall occultly taste or share in that great happening, and the Lord of the Ray of devotion and idealism shall see the consummation of his work and be satisfied. When the knowledge of God shall shine forth universally, and this is not the knowledge of or awareness of a great being, but the expression through human instrumentality of the divine omniscience, then will the Lord of concrete science, who is the embodiment of the fifth principle of mind, see his work brought to a conclusion. He stimulates the sense of awareness in humanity and nurtures the consciousness aspect in the subhuman kingdoms, producing the response, therefore, of matter to spirit, and bringing about the interpretation of that to which there has been a sentient rapport. Also, the Lord of the fourth ray of harmony, beauty, and art will add his share to the great creative work, and it will be found that in the elusive following to its source of that mysterious revelation which we call beauty, there will be expressed that subtle quality of which smell, in the animal sense, is the symbol. The great search and the esoteric following of the scent will come to an end. The fourth ray is preeminently the way of the seeker, the searcher, and the sensitive reflector of beauty. By means of the eye of God, light shines forth upon the way of the sun, the path of the planets, and the path of man. The Lord of adaptability and the intellect brings into expression and into objectivity the intelligent working out of the divine idea and plan. The intuition is literally the synthetic and immediate grasp of the truth as it essentially exists, and the Lord of the second ray will bring to a conclusion the entire evolutionary process through the development in humanity of that perfect insight which will make every human being a complete and intelligent cooperator with the plan. Through the application of the finger of God in its directing and forceful work, we have the cyclic destruction of forms, so that the manifestation of deity may grow in power and beauty. Thus the Lord of Power, or Will, performs the task of destruction, thereby bringing beauty into being, and the revelation of God's will into his beneficent purpose. Alright, so today I want to go over that passage that really stirred up a lot of deep thinking, a lot of anger, a lot of confusion, a lot of cognitive dissonance. I reached a ring past knot, esoteric psychology, esoteric studies, defined here. Before this, it was a really great part. It was really beautiful, all that good stuff. It talked about how the brain is like the eyes of the soul, and so when we sense things with our physical body, we're like seeing things. Our soul is allowed to see and experience life and human existence, physical existence, and it lists out the seven senses, including common sense as the sixth sense, and the seventh sense being our intuition, or our synthetic sense. Like the culmination of all of our senses is really our intuition. So that's the highest faculty that we can have because it's our spiritual sense. So that connects us with our highest, aptitude to pick up on our reality. All that was great. And then it goes on to say that there are correspondences, it could be said, with the seven rays and the seven senses and the divine senses. And then we got to this symbolic representation of what it said in the overall description of the book, which I'll say again, which is that, yes, we're describing these rays in a very symbolic way. It's very intentional, all that good stuff. I'm stalling. Let me pull it up. Here it is. Okay. It says that the soul and the qualities of the soul are closely tied up with the building, wrecking, rebuilding process. And it says this as if it's part of furthering of a plan. And there's no context here given, but it says that the process is building, wrecking, and rebuilding. And again, this section is kind of just combining our senses and all that's cool. It's like, oh, but it's combining them with these 7 builders, these great energies, and it's calling them the lords of, and saying that they'll be satisfied when they reach some culmination or some final stage of what's going on. And in the little paragraph where it defines the Lord of the first ray, and I'll say that paragraph, what it says is, through the application of the finger of God in its directing and forceful work, we have the cyclic destruction of forms, so that the manifestation of deity may grow in power and beauty. So that needs to be broken down. What are you talking about? What is the cyclic destruction of forms? Elsewhere in the book, Bailey talks about forms as us, right? We're incarnated in our bodies and we are living the form life. The joining of matter and spirit created form, the third aspect, or, of the triangle, the triplicity. And so if we are forms, are you saying the cyclic destruction of human beings in order to grow in power and beauty, for the deity to grow in power and beauty? I think that needs to be clarified. Because another thing that is referred to as forms is, in this work, but again, it's not specified here, is thought forms. So thought forms or kind of systems that don't work. So this could be looked on a societal level. You have certain types of, maybe a political structure that gets identified through the process of evolution as not the best for people, and we break that down over time. So it's the destruction of bad or negative thought forms, not necessarily the destruction of people or the destruction of physical places. And it's cyclic because that goes in time with these beings being the 7 builders, these 7 streams of energy being connected with the cycles of planets. And based on their proximity over time, they are known to have influences on set people whose birth charts are in a certain time and location. And we can see that also, like, if a group of people are born into a certain location where there's a dominant religion, and that tends to be how they're raised, those people are brought up with a certain mindset, and that's the location, and all of that plays a role. So on the birth chart, that's just zooming that out to a larger scale. And what it's saying about, we've seen that too with like generations, like the Pluto and Scorpio generation we talked about. It says here on this chart, I'll pull up, how different generations of people who were born in when Pluto was in a different place in the sky, because it makes its orbit, and the proximity to Earth and the sun creates, how close it is or how far it is, it impacts people from a full generation. Like there's a generation of people who were like maybe grandparents, or anyone who's watching this, there's a generation of people where it was common for them to not address taboo things and kind of just sweep things under the rug. There'll be, it was more common for the generation to feel skeptical about taking chances and changing career paths. Like it wasn't the norm. So, you have those generations, the boomers looking down on millennials and saying, man, they can't keep a job. They're too, they move around so much and they think they want to start at the top. And back in my day, I used to have to walk to school through 10 feet of snow, and I walked 10 miles to school, and then I went and I worked in a, whatever. And that dynamic, that mindset, it rolls over a certain generation. And there's been studies to kind of analyze how that relates to these cyclic time frames of these movements of these bodies in the sky. And then you'll have the generation below it, the millennials, that were kind of like, I shouldn't have to struggle my way to the top. Like, I have the potential to do this without having to work 10 years to prove myself to everyone in the company before I finally get this title. How about we work, how about we accelerate this a little bit? Because if you're not giving me what I need, I'm going to hop over here where they're willing to do that. And that's kind of that mindset that was like a, psychological break from the norm, because it shows the generational difference in mindset. And you have a whole new thing going on now with Gen Z and, whatever. And that's what we're saying here, is that different forms, mindsets, can be destroyed over time for the working out of the plan. But without context, which I think it would have been very easy for Bailey to include, it's just left out. And I think that was kind of a red flag for me, because really sharing a message of destruction as a spiritual necessity that raises some really important questions. Like, who decides what gets wrecked? How do we ensure that it's not used to justify harm? And that brings me back into the things that I didn't like about the fourth ray, which is harmony through conflict. Without context, it could sound like that's glorifying struggle, and like we have to go through conflict in order to have harmony. And that's not true. That's not the essential, the fruit of these teachings. And theosophy is supposed to be the pulling from different systems, different religions, essentially, and pulling that information together into like a framework that can work for people without the connection to that specific dogma or that specific umbrella of whatever that is. But if we kind of water it down, it's like the game of telephone, where you're not getting the full message, and this could be easily misinterpreted, which a lot of people say is happening in these New Age communities or what have you. Oh, they're experiencing X, that's part of the plan. You know, this is some divine unfolding. It's supposed to be bringing about, oh, through that conflict is going to be harmony, or beauty is coming from that. It's just like a slippery slope there of being misinterpreted. There's also, you know, issues with saying everything is a lesson or it's all divine will. If people are in abusive situations, or there's certain questions that we should be asking to reframe when we hear these kinds of teachings, this kind of esoteric language without context. Is that like we need to know who's benefiting from the destruction, right? Who's causing it? Who's wrecking things? If it's a divine thing, we're not meant to replace the divine. What we're meant to do is understand these divine traits and embody them and use them in our context, as above, so below. So I don't think we're meant to be destroying the world in order to bring about beauty and harmony. I think in our terms, knowing that idea of destruction is destruction of false beliefs, the false identity, the false self, all that stuff, to where we are releasing it, we're letting it go, we're checking it, we're seeing how it's impacted us. And the same thing with harmony through conflict. It's recognizing where conflict is brought about and learning that lesson from even observing it. You don't have to like, oh, I have to go through this so I can learn my lessons, or I like to learn the hard way, or I have to go through this to grow through it. All this kind of like weird martyrdom and victim causing and trauma porn and like weird ways to misinterpret spiritual teachings. So even the idea about choosing suffering before birth, it's just all of these ideas that conflict leads to harmony or destruction being part of the plan. We just need to realize, you know, honor the soul's agency, and it's not at the cost or expense of someone else. It's not desensitized to the suffering of anyone else. We're not directly inflicting the pain to try and justify harm or abuse or anything. And if we're witnessing someone else do it, we need to call that out. Like, that's not what, you know, this is about. The divine, these energies and these cycles, like we just said, the planets bring that about on their own. We don't need to help them. They do what they do. And we, based on, like it says, our degree of consciousness, sentiency, consciousness, and awareness. Sentiency is awareness of, you know, sentiency is the feeling and the response to our environment. So is there suffering in this environment? Let me be aware of that and move myself out of it. There's that old saying about the dog that's howling on the porch, right? And it's like, oh, why is he howling? Oh, he's laying on a nail. And the person walks by day after day and he's just sitting there howling. And they're like, well, why doesn't he get up and move? And I don't know what the answer was to that. Let me look that up, because it was a crazy story. What's the story? What's the story about the dog? Here it is. It says, the story. A man walks past a house and sees a dog lying on the porch whimpering. He asks the homeowner, "Why is your dog lying there crying?" The homeowner replies, "Because he's lying on a nail." The man asks, "Why doesn't he get up?" And the homeowner says, "Because it doesn't hurt enough yet." The lesson here is emotional inertia. People may stay in painful situations because the pain is familiar, not yet intolerable, or change feels harder than staying. Avoidance of discomfort. Even when we know something is wrong, we may delay action until the pain becomes unbearable. Spiritual bypassing. In esoteric context, this story can be misused to shame people for not choosing growth. Ethically reframed, it reminds us that discernment and readiness matter. Not all pain is a signal to act immediately. But, more towards what I was saying, is, you're supposed to look at those as signals if there's harm going on around you, or if you're like in a bad environment. This is saying, yeah, don't shame a person for not just, up and leaving, because yes, there's circumstances that you go through it, but recognizing my environment is impacting my experience. So that's a lesson. It's not that I'm going to put myself here so that I can endure this lesson. I'm meant to do this, endure the suffering, because it's my spiritual responsibility, and I'm going to cleanse the world by my allowing myself to suffer and lay on a nail. That's not what it is. It's like, do what you can to try and improve your environment. Whereas it's the idea of the different kingdoms, like it talks about. The human kingdom is the one that has consciousness, the conscious awareness to think about his thinking. Like animals in the wild and stuff, they might live in an area where another predator constantly comes in and attacks them. And that's just where they live, and they just go on living there. But we're a little higher than that animal, where we can think about where we are, and if that environment is abusive, or if that environment is not helpful for us, even if it's not just that physical environment, if it's just the kind of people we're listening to, if the stories are constantly giving us a negative outcome, we might want to shift to try listening to some different information or some different sources, changing it up. That's sentiency and awareness, because you're aware of how the environment is impacting you, and that allows you to be conscious. I'm making a conscious decision now based on that sentiency and that awareness. And those are the ways that we're supposed to be meant to analyze destruction, what to let go of, what to destroy in our own lives. And it's not destruction like annihilation. It just means I'm going to break this down. I'm going to I'm going to take these apart. I'm going to break this apart, and I'm going to rebuild it. So back to the wrecking, rebuilding, and wrecking that it says is important to the plan. Context is really needed, because it's not about going in and blowing stuff up. That's not, in my mind, it doesn't feel right as being part of the plan. It feels more like it's talking about it in that other way. And so I think that that's a dangerous thing that Bailey happens to do here, is by leaving out that context. Same thing with Ray 4. So I feel like that's one of the reasons why I had such a hard time with this. And moving forward, I'm going to continue to look at the text and see if it creates those distinctions, or better makes those distinctions, I guess you'd say. But for now, I was just like, all right, that's a interesting thing to leave people with without context, because the context is in the original teachings that this would have been syncretized from. But the idea that this can in any way harbor or justify actions where people are taking these matters into their own hands, that's not divinity. And I think that Bailey could have done a better job, and the Theosophy group or whatever could have done a better job that reframed destruction as discernment, or conscious release of things that no longer serve a person. And they could reframe the harmony through conflict, Ray 4, as integration, and not like glorifying the struggle, but like taking in information, like, oh, this conflict happens when this and this happens, so I'm going to take that information in, and now I'm going to move forward with more wisdom, and that wisdom brings more peace in my life, harmony. The last thing I'd like to show is that there's something to these triangles. So here's that image, right? Over here, we're the 7 rays. These first 3 rays, 1, 2, 3 points of a triangle. The first 3 rays are supposed to be broken down into these first major traits. And then out of this reflection from the 1 into the 3, you get the mini, is the way that it's said. Visually depicted, that's what we have here. So you have the 1, the source energy, this prism or prison, however you want to look at this plane that we're on, creates this way that we see things not as they are, right? The Maya in Hindu religion, the Maya is the great illusion that it calls this. So just like science says, things are not really solid, but we see them that way. We experience things around us solid. I'm sitting on a chair right now, but somehow, if you look at all of this really, really up close, it's just a bunch of little tiny particles that are just kind of together. But this, whatever we're having this experience reflected to us through, has us see things different from what they are. So if we see these colors in our visible spectrum, it's just because of what we're looking at it through, the frame that we're looking at it through, or the lens, this triangle, is showing us these different traits. They say the point of this is that we're divided into these different aspects or reflections of divinity so that the soul can experience itself in human form. But the point is not just to divide ourselves up. The point is recombination. The actual full process of evolution would be to recombine, which is why I love this depiction. So now we're going back into this prism, but that's interestingly reflected upside down here. So now you have the upward pointing triangle and the downward pointing triangle. And this isn't even a spiritual, this is just a science, replica. But what's really fascinating here, and I'll just touch on this really quickly because I gotta go, is that Maslow's pyramid gives us these triangles as well, but it's only pointing upward. Another spiritual chart gives us something super interesting. It has the upwards and the downwards. And some say that the triangle that's facing upwards is when we work on our spiritual stuff. The one that's facing downwards is when we focus only on our physical stuff. And when you have half a life, you're not complete, right? But this is a work. And this one was something, I've only seen it this way, but it depicts possibly mastery of each of these different energy centers in the body, which are spinning energy centers in the body we know as chakras. When you overlay these together, you get this star, which we see in a lot of spiritual things, is on a lot of different teachings and things like that. But in the center of that vehicle, that pure-hearted love, all of this is so interesting to me because, again, what if the purpose is not just this one upward pyramid where he lumps all this spiritual stuff up here in the self-actualization prism? All of these other things are actually the lower level. This is the downward facing triangle. And this is actually broken down a lot more, what it shows here as self-actualization. He doesn't really tell us how to actualize. It just says that we can only get there once we have all these other things. But these spiritual teachings kind of take it a little bit further than that, which I think this makes a little more sense, is that, sorry, I can't get this out of here. It's about mastering something. It's about this process of recombination. Overlay this triangle over this one, and you get that star. There's different spiritual things known like a Merkaba, which is something that gets activated. I won't go too deep for anyone that doesn't know that. I don't want to go too far, but that's something to put a pin in and look up later. But yeah, so hey, what if we have to first be broken down to learn who we are as an individual, and then we combine ourselves back to learn who we are, our higher self. And when you overlay that, when you have mastery of the body, sorry, zoom out. You have mastery over your spiritual body and your physical body, because you have these others in check too. Through this, what work? The chakra work. Everyone's like, what is that? It's just like spiritual nonsense. No, it's the same stuff that's in Maslow's pyramid. These lower three make up a triangle. This is all what's in the lower self, the lower body, the root, energy, stability, comfort, safety, sexuality, pleasure, sociability, personality, power, determination. That's all that lower triangle. The upper triangle, the spiritual self, is when you master your expression. You learn the power of your words, the throat chakra, communication, how to communicate intelligently. The intuition, which it shows again, that was the top level, the highest sense that we can get right through Bailey. Meditation, trust, interesting. The third eye chakra represents that. And the crown chakra is consciousness, spirituality, all of this. In the same way, this is just another way of looking at that other chart, right? The top three of the triangle, the bottom three of the triangle, and right here in the center, again. And oh, look, there's that star. The upwards facing triangle overlaying the downward facing triangle with love, acceptance, compassion in the center. Maybe this is the work. I think for me, I'll leave with this Excel thing that I put together with these traits and these things about the rays that I kind of wanted to put again in another way, because we have the other chart that we look at, but putting it back together in terms of the lower expression, higher expression, all that good stuff. Here's that. Maybe it's better without me here. So we have on the left how it shows the first three rays are the rays of aspect. So these are the major rays, and then the last four are kind of offshoots of them, or they are all supposed to be equally represent the divine, but the first three are the ones that are the recipe for creative work, to be able to do or to create something, you need to have will, power, the loving wisdom of how to implement or create the outcome that you're looking for, and then to work intelligently and take action, active intelligence, to bring that into fruition. These are considered the rays of the monad. So for the most part, we're in these these rays that are also expressions of the divine down here. So anyways, this is what I came to find. The lower expression. These are what we see actually a lot in present day. People using domination, pride, sentimentality, manipulation, drama, instability, dogma, cold logic, fanaticism, rigidity, superficial rituals, and things like that. These are still expressions of these rays, but this is the lower expression. I think that's a huge thing for us to look for right now. And when we see people in the systems and the things that we get behind, is it destructive or is it constructive? Because yeah, the first ray is going to be our leaders, political disruptors, but are they causing leadership that teaches to be prideful and dominant, or are they fearlessly honest? Political disruptors that have the divine will to express fearless truth. That's someone who is operating in their divinity, and so forth, all the way down. So, and each of these rays are meant to condition our consciousness. So over here for the first ray, these are people who are singularly focused and tend to initiate action. But again, that action is towards leadership, strength, purposeful destruction. Again, initiation of change. And so it's good to kind of keep these things in mind. And I'll just leave this on the screen here so I can maybe take a screenshot and go down them. But again, I put this one, fourth ray, because they say this is very much relevant to our time right now as humans, because the fourth ray is connected to the fourth kingdom of nature. Humans are the fourth kingdom of nature. So we are very sensitive to this ray influence. But is it because we're bringing about more drama and more instability on a global scale, or are we bringing about more beauty, more balance, more synthesis? If we're moving towards the higher expression of divinity, we should see more of this. And this is what Bailey has in there, saying that the ray conditions our consciousness with chaos before a higher order and the struggle of humanity, because humanity is the fourth kingdom in nature. And this I just again wanted to really flag, because this doesn't seem like the right message to be signaling to people as a spiritual truth or guiding principle. It seems like this is what some people are trying to do. Some architects or diplomats or people who are unconventional, they're causing drama. They're stirring up instability and angst in people, and they are bringing about imbalance. And this idea of chaos before a higher order, that's not a spiritual teaching. There's nothing that says that we must have a struggle or chaos. But I feel like along the way there were some people that decided that they could transfer their karma onto others by having them believe that we are meant to suffer, or that their actions will be somehow vindicated by bringing about like twisted logic. I'll make it very simple. Like people that think, oh, in this grand scheme of life, there's going to be people in all camps, right? There's got to be people that express the lower expressions so that the people that express the higher expressions can come out and, balance that out. Like, I have to exist because that exists. And they actively take on that mindset to be the antithesis of grace and divinity. That's not anyone's job. You're naturally influenced by, again, your birth chart, your place that you were born, the time that you were born, the people that you were around, the way that you were raised, but you were given a spark of consciousness, and it's your job to navigate through life towards a higher expression of the divine. If you choose to take on like a villainous role in this whole execution of the plan of the divine, you are going to take on that karma of that decision that you made. You are not choosing a role as a villain in order to allow someone to overcome it and be like, oh look, I brought about the salvation of people through my horrible acts. That's not how it works. But I feel like at some point along the way, there are people who've snuck in these kinds of weird misuse and misinterpretations of spiritual teachings. And I think the Theosophical Society at one point did fall victim to that. I know Sevan says that in one of his videos, or in a few of them. He talks about how Blavatsky was a part of that, and it dates back to, again, those people who were working for the royalty and the rulers and the kings and queens of the time. They had these people who studied the occult working for them and living with them and giving them insight so that they can stay in power. And those people were doing dealings with dark arts and working with, the dead and whatever, grimoires and magic books and spells and all this stuff and sacrifices. That all exists. But nobody anywhere in this teaching says that that is the answer that brings you to divinity. That brings you to karma, not dharma. And it's a path, and it's out there, but there's no way that we're supposed to be like inverting that towards that's a pure pursuit, or that's no one needs you to do that. Again, we're not enacting the divine. We're not becoming the divine order of who stays and who goes, who's good, who's bad. Remember, we're not supposed to judge. So how do you think that we can put ourselves in the place of causing mass destruction or choosing which people get to live and which people don't and all that stuff? I think we should pull back and again, analyze any teachings that kind of blur that line and go that way. And I read it pretty well said, and as a closing thought, that we're supposed to metabolize spirituality in the same way that we metabolize food. So like break it down, absorb the nutrients, and release the waste. Gross. The psyche should also metabolize spiritual teachings. You need to break down, I'm going to read it here, I'll find it. So here's the steps. Break down the experience into its emotional, symbolic, and ethical components. Discern what is nourishing, truth, insight, growth, and what is toxic, shame, distortion, and bypassing. Integrate the insight into your own relational and ethical life, how you relate to others, and how you conduct yourself. And release, let go of what does not serve without suppressing or bypassing, so you don't get to tweak this to get away with murder. That's not what any of this is about. And there is an energy, that's the whole idea. This is a pervasive energy, the divine, and it sees all, it knows all, and it has all within itself. And you are an offshoot of that. Therefore, you can tap into that energy to navigate your life in harmony with divine order and law. But you do not get to trick the system to think that you're meant to enact those laws or anything like that. And there's someone who knows. That's the idea. So what do you do when you think no one's watching? Spirituality tells you that there's always someone watching, and it is the you that is aware of how your actions impacted another one. In some way and somehow you're going to attract that reaction back to you. So when you cause harm to another, the spiritual person says, or the conscious person says, I just harmed myself, and I know that this is going to outpicture to me down the line. Are you okay with that? You should be. So again, I think that that's where I was really like, Bailey. And I still don't love how I've done this, but that's me being in my head. I want to get this shared so we can move on to other things. We got other cool things to work on, and I wanted to get past this hump. So I still don't love this. I still don't know how I feel altogether with Bailey, because I had to do some marking and go jump ahead too and see if she clarifies this elsewhere, and I'm not 100% sure. So this is on the TBD block, but thank you so much for watching, and I appreciate you learning with me even when it's tough, or even when there's stuff that we need to work through look at a little more closely than others. But I hope this has been helpful. Take care.